What's going on, everybody? Gunnar here, and I have a little Pike and Musky sized chew toy for you. This is my BodyTubing BULKhead, which is a Popovics bulkhead variation. And instead of doing an extended body with heavy mono, I throw in 2 Flymen Shanks, we run up, and then I use a little BodyTubing, 1/8" BodyTubing trick to retain that hollow fly style flare with incorporating the bulkhead water push. So I just want to walk you guys through it. I know I had this on YouTube, but it's a really old video. Do things a little bit differently, and I don't actually go over how to do the tail section. So I kind of want to do that for you guys. And you can do the tail 2 ways. The tail can be both, ostrich curl if you got really long ostrich curls, or you can use saddle hackle. And this is just very standard 5 to 7 inch strung Chinese saddle hackle. So first of all, I'm going to come in. This is a Flymen 20mm fish spine, which is the smallest kind of style of shank that they offer. They also offer an articulated shank in 20mm, which we are also going to use next. I like the fish spine for the tail over the articulated shank because you can see the difference in hoop size, and it's a little tricky getting your tail section to lay straight with that big of a hoop on the articulated shank. And you can also tie this fly with a 100 strand GSP or a 150 GSP. If you haven't tried GSP for bucktail work, I highly recommend it, but I'm going to use a heavy monofilament thread. This is from Danville. And I kind of like the monofilament. It's a little bit stretchy. It kind of locks the bucktail in place, but what it stops you from kind of overdoing the bucktail work because it's only so strong. The GSP is going to be much stronger, but the mono only allows you to compress kind of a fine range of bucktail, and it keeps my bugs sparser so that they breathe and have a little bit more depth to them. If you have a hard time finding quality bucktail, find a buddy who hunts. This is from my friend John. He's got a family farm, Littlefield Farms, and I get probably a dozen tails a year from my friend, and these are absolutely prime. So bucktail in general, this is going to be the base, this is going to be the tip. From base to tip, most hollow, medium hollow, not very hollow. The hollowness determines how much it flares. Not all bucktails are created equal. So you might have a bucktail that's got a lot of trapped air, and you might have one that these aren't that airy. So you just have to experiment with that. You also have fibers that tend to be kind of wavier, have a little bit more crinkle, and tend to be straighter. I like to use straighter fibers for tailing material, wavier fibers as forward bulk, because that waviness adds more saturation, and it kind of gives the illusion of bulk without having to add bulk. So you can kind of use that illusion to increase your saturation or your color, but without actually having to make a fly bulkier and heavier, so it's not going to hold as much water and stuff like that. So this is tip hair, right? Non-trapped air tip hair. And it's super sparse. This is a very thin layer to help support our hackle and add some saturation. I'm going to do a straight, clean cut, and I'm going to lightly catch that and try to keep it for the most part just right on top. I'm going to compress those butts, but then I'm going to loosely walk my thread forward to kind of close that down, so I just have very straight bucktail coming off the back. Now this strung Chinese saddle hackle, if you choose the right length, and you have to select it yourself, but a hackle like this, so if I hold this at the camera, right, my feather's flat, my stem is vertical. The stem is compressed perpendicular to the orientation of the feather, which makes tying them in flat really difficult. If you want to tie it in flat, you typically tie it on top of the shank. That's how you get that flat look. You can look at my hollow point tutorial, go into detail about that. Now that stem, as you move back in the feather, that stem will twist and flatten. So way back here in the marabou section of this feather, that stem is super flat, and I can pin that feather directly to the side and it'll stay on the side. That's a big advantage. That's why I like to use these saddle hackles that are kind of more or less junky saddle hackles, because they're extremely easy to work with and get the right length. Now I want this hackle maybe a 1/2 inch past the end of my bucktail, maybe just a 1/2 inch past it, not much farther. Any farther than that and you kind of lose the benefit from that bucktail, and you lose your saturation and your silhouette, because these hackles, we're only using 2 of them, and they're rather sparse and thin. It's not a big slopping feather or anything like that. Now, to help orient these, you can take, so you'll see one of these was the correct length and one of them was not. One of these I have a little bit of stem that's still compressed, so I'm going to have to tweak that to get it to lay right, but this one's going to be just perfect. So I'll put that on the far side that I'll have less control over. Boom, you can see that feather's just laying perfectly vertical. It's got a little twist to it, which is something I'll deal with, but so something that I'm gonna have to play with this feather because my stem's not gonna do what I want. Something that I'm going to do for every major step of this fly is add super glue. There's a lot of exposed thread wraps, if you will, on this pattern. And so basically this fly is going to take me a while to tie, and it takes a while because of all the super glue steps. So do those at home. I'm just going to like fast cut through them so you guys don't have to watch me do that, because that'll get really annoying, and you obviously get the picture. So just be aware of that I'm just going to fast forward through all my super glue work. But I like to come in, I should use a little bit more, but basically every single bucktail stack, this is another thing I can kind of just skip over, is going to have a holographic Flashabou, some sort of Flashabou. I just do the straight size. I don't do Magnum or anything, just straight Flashabou. The tail, you use it at full length, but after the tail section, every bucktail stack, I basically do my Flashabou the length of the bucktail. So you'll see me, I'll come in, I'll tie it in, and then I'll very quickly cut off like 3 or 4 inches from my Flashabou so that it's the length of the bucktail tied in 50-50. And I'll show you that in a little bit greater detail. So we're almost done with this tail shank. All we got to do left is add 1 bucktail spin right here at the eye, and then from here on out, after this, it's all going to be reverse hollow tie. So I'm going to move down my bucktail a little bit so I get a little bit more trapped air, get a little bit of flare, add a little bit of bulk into this back section. Whenever you preen out your bucktail on a hollow style fly, you want to leave some of the length variation. You don't want to preen out all your fibers, or else you'll get a staircase. You'll get like a stack and a stack and a stack. You want it to be like a continuous section. So be aware of that when you're selecting your fibers. You go to preen these out, grab like the midpoint and down. Don't grab way up by the tips, because you want to keep that size variation in there. And then I'm simply going to measure this off, cut a nice clean edge, and this is exactly like spinning deer hair, and this is kind of where I got that technique from, aside from Kelly. Right on top, I'm going to add a loose wrap, loose wrap, loose wrap. Then I'm going to come in, I have a little bit of pressure with my bobbin hand, right on top, pushing right on top. The hair is going to distribute, push a little bit on the sides, and then you can kind of just flare that. And that's how you get a super consistent spun bucktail that's going to be even on all sides. You put it directly on top, you push it straight down to distribute it around the hook, you kind of pinch it around so that it's even, and then you can tie that down. And I'm just going to let that flare like crazy, because when we get that wet, that straight tie will compress down quite a bit and won't hold its shape nearly as much as the hollow ties. So then again, Flashabou, gonna come in 3 inches off, and this is the technique I use for the Flashabou for the whole fly. You put it in 50-50 around your thread, you pin it straight to the top, and then you take half those fibers off to the side, and so you hemisphere the top of the fly the whole way down. I don't really mess with flash on the bottom unless I'm doing like a really big musky sized version, just because I don't think it's that necessary. Just broke my thread on the whip finish. slightly concerning, no big deal. Cool. So things are going to get a little bit jumpier here. I'll walk you through the first reversal process and making sure that you get the right silhouette and length and taper and consistency. But then it's just a lot of tying from there on out. So let's get this bug whipped up and get to the exciting part, which is kind of the hook and shank and head area. So the next shank is a 20 millimeter. So they're the same size shank, which is important because we're using the same length bucktail, right? And so if you increase your shank length but your bucktail stays the same length, you get a weird gap. That's why if you see like a lot of T-bones in that style of tying, the hair in the back is really short and it gets longer as the shanks get bigger. That way you kind of bridge that gap. But we're doing the opposite of that. We're using the same length hair the entire way and using our distance per stack to create the silhouette. So that's my tail, 20 millimeter fish spine from Flymen, moving up to a 20 millimeter articulated shank from Flymen. And so on this shank, you'll see this can go up. You can see that, right? Whoa! So you can see how this, if it goes up above the loop, it can foul. It gets stuck up here. So when you tie these in, you want to take your thread back to a vertical point so that this can only articulate, it can't slide up and over. You see what I'm saying? Back that back out a little bit. So when I put my thread back on here, again, this is just a monofilament thread, which is actually really nice for closing these loop gaps because it actually has volume to it, so it'll support itself when you're running up here. But you want to physically run up the loop of this fish spine, this articulated shank, this articulated shank, and you want to make a little thread dam right up here so that that shank can no longer slip up and foul up, but it gets stuck kind of just in an articulated position. And then I just come in and hit this with super glue. You can see I stop my thread right where the bottom of the shank wire ends, and that's the kind of the best, most consistent spacing for having enough room to do a hollow tie here. And then if you ever put a lot of super glue on something and you want it to dry really fast, just exhale on it, and it'll help that cure up. Then pinch that dry. So again, we're coming in a little bit more trapped fibers. I'm going kind of like middle of the bucktail right here, and that tends to be kind of your longest fibers, and it's also kind of ideal for the reverse tie just for the amount of air that's in them. I'll use the very bottom hairs for the bulkhead section. It's a little too many fibers. And you'll have to play with bucktail density on your own and kind of get a feel for that. But to stage this, because you have to understand, it's all about getting that continuous silhouette. So again, we preened out maybe the bottom half, but not that third and not that 7/8, and you want to leave that variation. I'm holding it in my left hand because we're going to reverse tie this, and I want my tips to bleed into one another. I want the long fibers from the bucktail to bleed into the shorter fibers from the previous stack, and that's how you build that continuous silhouette. So I like that. I'm going to come in and trim that clean. And then this is called a hollow fly technique, or a reverse tie, or something like that. So we can see my bucktail's pointed kind of towards the eye of the shank here. I distributed that the exact way I did the back hook. I'm going to come in and clean off these butts. Now, one of the most important things for durability on these reverse ties is going to be super glue. So what I like to do is I'll hold my thread level, so it's going to be completely level with the floor. That way the glue doesn't run down into my bobbin. Tag the bottom kind of 1.5 inches of your thread and wrap that super glue through those bucktail butts. That's going to get you the durability and bite proofness that you kind of need, because it's a natural material and it will, they don't last forever. So that's a big help for durability. You're going to take a hollowed out pen. So I took a pen, ripped the actual pen tube out of it, use that to force that bucktail backwards. And one of the most important things to get a very clean look is to not trap fibers when you bring your thread through. So you can see I'm going to preen these back with my fingers. I'm pulling straight down, straight level. My thread is completely horizontal, and then up onto the shank, and then wrap backwards. That is how you trap 0 fibers, and it's the same way you bring your thread through a stack of deer hair. Now when you build your cone for a reverse tie, it's extremely important that your cone is perfectly circular. I'm going to do a really bad example of what not to do, but if you wrap, you can see my bobbins behind the shank and out in front of the shank, behind the shank, out in front of the shank, this way. You see what I'm saying? My loops, my tying is angular. It's not circular. And it helps me to think of holding my bobbin handle completely level, completely horizontal to the hook shank, and that way I build a perfect cone. You obviously can do it at an angle so long as your thread travels a circular path, but it's a big deal, because if you wrap at an inconsistent angle, the cone from the bucktail will be compressed or pinched or flattened and flared, and you won't get that clean kind of hollow tie, hollow fly look, and it won't swim true, because you want it to be perfectly even so that that back is animated from the push of water kind of simultaneously and universally and all that kind of good stuff. So whenever my thread cone gets a little big, I'll just I'll hit it with some super glue and keep wrapping. So you can leave this bigger than you think, because the water, this right now has a little staticky, that water will kind of push it down and help make those fibers look correctly. We're going to get this fly wet when we're done here. And then again, coming in with a Flashabou, just cut 2 or 3 inches off of it. Around the thread, pin it to the top, and then we'll walk it over to the side so it's hemisphered on top of the fly there. And that kind of got away from me, and I'm just going to make it work. Okay, so I'm going to walk you guys through the articulation real quick, and then the next 2 hollow ties after this I'm going to kind of blow right through, because if you just use this technique that I just showed you on the next 2 ties, that's all you got to know. So for the hook is kind of important. I like to use a rather thick wire hook. Obviously we're fishing for predators, so that durability comes into mind. But when you have this bulbous head, right, this is a really thick water pushing head on here. I don't want that fly to twist and roll and wobble. I need it to be relatively stabilized, so a really big thick wire hook with a large gap is rather important, just to keep the fly oriented. I'd consider it to be keeled, right? So this is a 4/0, which is about a mid-size hook for me for a predator. A 4/0 Ahrex hooks Predator Stinger, which is a PR 320. And these Predator Stingers are so prime for these big hooks, big flies, excuse me. So this articulation, we're going to come in with about 40-pound nylon coated stainless steel, and I'm going to do just this little back half, because if you go in front of this, your wire ends are going to get in the way of your hollow tying and your reverse tying, and you'll cut your thread off, and it'll be a pain in the butt. Now we're not going to use an articulated bead for spacing, and I'll show you why, because it's just unnecessary. But this wire doesn't have a lot of twist to it, so I'm going to pin it directly to the side of my hook. And you have to understand that these shanks that we're extending, I would consider this to be an extended body. The shanks that we're extending don't have a hook in them. There's going to be literally no tension whatsoever on this wire, except for a little water drag. If a fish bites that, this is more than enough wire to keep this in place from falling off. You're not going to have any issues with that whatsoever. So you're going to come in, make sure you get this correctly oriented with the Flashabou on top. I'm going to make a very small loop in the back here, and I want that loop, I'm going to actually make this loop smaller. I like to run my loops almost in line with the hook shank, directly on the side of the fly, and that loop has just enough pressure on that hook eye that it's not going to want to go all the way down and it can't go all the way around. You can see there's, I don't know if you can see it, but if you play with this yourself when you're tying this, it won't physically be able to wrap around that hook. It doesn't like it. There's just enough tension on that very small loop coming off my side. You can see how small that loop is. That hook eye has a little bit of pressure on it so that it can't foul. And that way we keep our 20 millimeter spacing. We keep everything perfectly in line with the hook shank, kind of like a chocolate fish spine theory, keeping everything in line with the shank so that push, and you kind of get this like slipstream effect for the back of this fly to articulate in. And then I'm obviously going to hit that with some super glue. So this fly, from here on out, basically, I guess when we get to the head, from here on out, the next two ties are going to be relatively simple, just reverse ties. This one's going to be all white. This one I'm going to blend white and brown. You want to start, you can see we have a 20 millimeter spacing, 20 millimeter spacing. You want to visualize a 20 millimeter spacing, keeping everything consistent to get the perfect silhouette. As we move forward, the next stack will be slightly closer, maybe 18 or 17 millimeters. Just, you know, kind of use your gut. And you have to shorten that. If you do not shorten that on this 4/0 hook, and every hook's going to be different, you're going to have to use your gut to get this correctly. But you want more room at the head than less room. If there's not enough room, you are going to be praying for forgiveness. So kind of imagine crowding the back a little bit, building the density. You want to increase the density because now we're getting towards the shoulders of the fly. You want to start pushing a little bit more water. We're going to use the same amount of bucktail as this previous stack for the most part, and then we'll kind of get a denser as we move towards the head. So I just wanted to mention that. This next two stuff is just very straightforward reverse ties with Flashabou. And we'll see you at the head. So something that is worth mentioning is all these techniques, all this is kind of information on tying technique and bucktail manipulation and what this fly pattern is derived from, which is Bob Popovics' bulkhead pattern. I would highly recommend that you check out a book that he released. I believe it was maybe a year and a half ago. The book title is Fly Design, and it's an absolutely epic technique book for working with bucktail. It's got a lot of epoxy work in there, some synthetic flies in there, and it's got a lot of theory behind why these flies are successful and the techniques are why they were developed. So extremely awesome book and resource that if you're kind of like, I don't know where to start for pike and musky, a bucktail deceiver is where I would start, and that's a Popovics fly. Bucktail deceivers, bulkhead deceivers, extended body bucktail deceivers, extended body bulkheads, beasts. I mean, that is the bottom line predatory fly, and it's all bucktail, and it's super simple, cheap, easy. And if you get down bucktail techniques, if you can work with a natural material and create a consistent fly, which is difficult because natural materials aren't consistent. If you can take something that takes you have to treat each step, each fly, each stack slightly unique. You have to always be conscious. I can't, wow. But I forget what I was talking about. It's a great book. Seriously, read it, buy it, support Bob. Seems weird to call him Bob. But support Mr. Popovics, who is just a saltwater legend, and this is like the bare bones essential to every predator fly ever designed. And again, if you can tie with bucktail, you can basically tie with anything. That's how I look at it. And I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna show you guys, this video is gonna be forever long if I keep talking, but I'm gonna show you guys really quick, like for 20 seconds, how to blend hair, because this is really cool and it'll help your material handling ability a ton. So basically, we'll back this way out. So you take your material, it's in my hand, I have a brown on the bottom, white here, and I simply put my thumb on it, and it's like separating dubbing. You just pull it out, put it back on top, pull it out, put it back on top. If your fibers get a little crazy, restack them up a little bit, right? And you keep the tips aligned this way, and then you're going to stack this once you get this done. And I'm not too worried about how perfect it is. I am a little bit. Can't help myself. But when you're done with this, you're basically going to take them. I like to use my right hand to stack stuff. And then you just want to drop them, physically drop them, like hold it up, drop it. But you follow it on the fall with your hand. Your hand chases it. You're not, this isn't like, I'm not pushing this. I chase it with my hand as it falls. And that's how you align bucktail butts. Which I want the bucktail butts to be aligned and the tips to be uneven so that I get that random bleeding silhouette, right? If you align all your tips, you get staircase, staircase, staircase. And that's not, in my opinion, a beautifully tied hollow fly. So again, I'm holding this backwards because I'm going to reverse it. My tips are lining up with the shorter end here, bleeding perfectly, and I got the length that I want to cut these to. Now on every reverse stack so far, I've cut off my bucktail butts. But this time, I'm going to leave them in, and I'm going to leave them flared. It's kind of like a hidden bulkhead technique, which we'll get to the bulkhead technique when we do the head. So you can see I'm going to leave those butts in. I don't know why, like you want to cut them off, maybe. You can do whatever you want. But you cut them off on the back just because they absorb water. Now that water absorption is honestly negligible for the most part. I'm going to zoom this back in, sorry. That water absorption, for the most part, it really doesn't matter. Some people say that, you know, it adds durability. I don't really know. If you do this super glue step right here, it's probably not that big of a deal. What it does add is bulk. It's gonna, when you reverse this, these bucktail butts will keep that stack, this forward wing stack, from just collapsing, and it'll give it more volume, right? Which is what I want. I'm trying to build volume and bulk and increase my hollow angle as I move forward, and those butts are simply going to help support that hair, so it'll hold that shape for a longer period of time. Yeah, that was a completed sentence. I don't know where I was going with that. It'll hold its shape for a longer period of time, because it's being supported by something. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, that cutting off your butts is not always mandatory, and sometimes not cutting off your butts is done on purpose to kind of help support a reversed hollow wing. And again, I think the water weight that they add is kind of a dumb excuse. It's just not a lot of weight. If you're throwing a 10 weight fly, like, you know, a 10 weight rod, a sparse bucktail fly like this, that is nothing. That little water is nothing. So check it out. We got this nice steep angle. Our angles keep getting steeper. All these tips perfectly bleed into one another. You should be able to, if you stroke your hand down and release the fibers, they should slowly release almost continuously. You shouldn't get a release, 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 right? It should all just slowly flare out one at a time, because you have all these uneven tips, right? And then we're going to come back in with some more Flashabou, and then we're going to tie in our 8-inch Flymen Fishing Company Chocolates body tubing. Basically, I wanted to do a bulkhead, but I wanted to keep my hollow fly silhouette. So we're going to use 1/8-inch body tubing to flare the bucktail. That way we get the hollow fly silhouette. But then we're going to leave the bucktail butts in and reverse tie the bucktail butts. That's the bulkhead technique that Popovics came up with, right? And so you get this hollow fly water pushing. It's almost like a Buford variation. And it's almost a simplified version of it that I think is really easy to execute. Once you've done it, you know, just a handful of times, it becomes very, very easy to execute. I should tell you guys what length this is, because it comes into play. 1.5 inches, just under 1.5 inches. I might need to shorten this up, but I'll show you what to do real quick so you get the length right. Burn that end so it can't unravel, and we'll force this over itself. We're going to come in and catch these butts. Again, the body tubing bugs. Reverse this before you do anything and make sure it does not compromise this bucktail. If it pushes on this bucktail, cut it off and tie it in shorter. Like just pull the tip forward, cut the tip shorter, and reverse it back again. It's extremely important that that does not compromise that bucktail. And we'll just whip finish. Super glue is your friend. This is all exposed thread wraps. You need to make sure this is all golden secured. So you can see how much headroom we have. We have to fit 2 bucktail stacks in here, reverse tied, Flashabou lateral lines, and some hairline dubbing, real fake jungle cockeyes. These guys, which these are optional. I just put these in for the, honestly, for the first time yesterday, and I think they came out sweet. They look awesome. They are a super cool hotspot right at the head of a bulkhead, and they're hidden. I actually hid them. You can see that these are actually physically hidden inside the bulkhead, which is cool. I think it's really cool because they're like perfect eye spots. So I'll show you how to do that, and then we'll be done because this video's taking like a lifetime to film. Which is typical. I expected that, man. So coming in with our first bulkhead tie. The first one I'm going to do a little bit sparse because and it helps if you do them both sparse, especially if you're going to use the monofilament because it's a little touchy. So you'll say you want to come in with maybe 3/4 of the density that you did for one of the hollow ties. Actually, I kind of messed that up. You want to pull out the longest of the fibers and kind of leave some of the shorter ones in. And you want this, you want to continue this silhouette, but I want this to start getting shorter. You want to build the forehead basically of a fish. You want that to start leading forward. We want about that much to be reversed. Quite happy with that. If I don't like it, I'll just cut it off and redo it. So I'm gonna loose wrap. My bucktail's at like a 45-degree angle here, right? Put another one down and another one down, and then literally just walk this around. Add some thread. Make sure that none of my tips are kind of caught anywhere. I need a little bit more bucktail, so you just add it. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. This came in a little too sparse. Just make sure that when you add bucktail, you did not tie this in at full length. So you need to rematch your lengths here so that you don't overpower this. And then to make sure that you set your angle correctly, you can simply walk your thread back towards the body tubing and that'll flare. Or you can back it off and it won't flare. You can back it back and it'll flare, right? So you have absolute 100% control over the flare of that head. And then this is the bulkhead technique. You take your bucktail butts, and you remember that hollow fly that we tied? This is all hollow ties, right? That's what we're going to do to these bucktail butts, which will be responsible then for flaring our front stack of bucktail. So the Popovics bulkhead is not a super straight-edged Buford head like this, and so I like to come in and we angle these fibers back and we create a random kind of head that has the greatest density at the core. This can be tricky and it can also be easy to mess up, so just take it slow. I find it helpful to pull on these collar hairs. Make sure you're not trapping off or cutting off any of this long bucktail fiber. And just look at it from the front. You can see this side's a little bit longer than the other side. Boom. I like the way that looks now. you can see how important it was not to crowd this hook eye, right? It gets really short really fast. I'm going to come up, this is some dyed pearl Flashabou. I love this stuff. It's super opally reflective, but it has like an olive saturation to it, and blues and oranges and yellows and chartreuses. And I like to use quite a bit. This is kind of like an overwing, almost like a back reflection, like you would use a lot of stuff for, like a peacock. And we'll do that just like we've done every other flash stack, right on top. And then I'm going to come in and do my absolute best to split a micro lateral line flash straight down the side. This is Hedron's micro lateral line, which is like 1/69 inch. Cool. Now this last tie, you get lucky because the hook eye will help you physically reverse the bucktail, because the hook eye is kind of like a little material dam that you can wedge your thread against. So again, I'm coming in with base hairs now, trying to get the most kind of trapped air and flare as possible. Take out some of these longer fibers so that our collar length's kind of like the perfect length here, and I can tie closer to the bases, which are going to be more hollow. And then I'm just going to eyeball that. And again, coming in with a 45, and then we're just going to walk that around to distribute that evenly. Add some tension. Again, I need to add just a little bit of fibers here. And then this is where the fake jungle cock comes in. So if you guys can figure this stuff out. If I want this about that length. Make sure that's all even. And if you need to buy yourself a little more room, which I kind of do, just a hair, be careful, but you can come in with Pat Cohen's kind of fugly packer and just move that hair stack back just microscopically. That'll give you just a hair more wiggle room so that you can properly use that hook eye as a material dam to butt your thread against, so you can reverse this nice and easily and get a super clean head. And again, that cone angle is a kind of a big player in how well this turns out. You can see I kind of am a little on the inside on your side. Booyah, home free. That came out sweet. Then you just come in, hit this head with some super glue, and then we'll trim this head up so that it's nice and kind of random. And yeah, so thanks for watching. Sorry that video was so long. It's just you know, there's a lot of technique and a lot of tricks and very simple things that go a long way when working with bucktail, and hopefully that is a good resource for you guys. And this is, so the fly is maybe 8 inches long. It's kind of like a single hooked Buford variation, and I would consider it an extended body bulkhead variation, and that's kind of in the name implied, hopefully, BodyTubing BULKhead. So it's this kind of like perfect if you're just getting into musky fishing and you want to fish this style of head that pushes a lot of water, makes a lot of noise and disturbance, animates all this bucktail, you can very easily stack these fibers. You can do a stacked reverse tie no problem, so that you can do like tan over whites and olive over whites. But this is an excellent bug to fish musky in skinny water, smaller water, stunted populations in lakes where you might have an average size of 30 inches or 35 inches. You don't need to be throwing a 16-inch fly, and this can be cast on an 8-weight, no problem. Again, it's all about sparse bucktail work, and using layers and building that up in uneven tips, so you create this even silhouette. And if you employ all that stuff into your tying, you kind of use the monofilament to constrain yourself so that you don't over tie these bucktail stacks. These flies, if I only had one fly to fish predators with, it would either be this or an imposter. It is easily in my top 2 for the fishiest, most productive flies, period. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Take it out and give it a try. I know predator season is just opening up here in Minnesota, so it should be a good time. But thanks for watching, and have a good day, guys.